In the quiet night of the northeast coast of England, the waves only whisper softly as they approach the shore, as if trying to hide something. There are no strange sounds, no police pointing guns, no helicopters roaring, just a lone rubber boat quietly pulling up to the desolate sandbank, where each cold wind carries a sense of unease. Three men step out from the water's edge, their movements hurried, their eyes never once looking back. No one knows who they are, where they came from, or why they are in such a remote place on a moonless night. But within hours, their presence has shaken the national security system. For what they carry is not a weapon, but a discreetly packaged mass of darkness, more valuable than gold and more dangerous than any blade. And from that moment, a chain of events is set in motion, unstoppable, undoable. Under the cold mist that crept through the grassy shores, the main characters of the underground drama were quietly emerging. Not mafia bosses in suits or hidden gunmen, but two seemingly anonymous young men, Mark Moran and David Livingstone. Both were from Argyll, a peaceful land in the west of Scotland, where the sea and the mountains embraced in silence, where people lived simply, hard-working, and often away from the lights of the city. But beneath that gentleness were invisible burdens, debt, unemployment, and a hopeless future. Mark, 23, had worked odd jobs on the docks, and David, 25, had been an electrical maintenance technician, both with clean records and no connections to the underworld, until a man from Colombia showed up. Didier Tordesillas Reyes. The stranger did not carry a gun, but a promise. Just one trip, one night, in exchange for tens of thousands of pounds. No papers, no questions asked. Just a boat, a deserted beach, and a blind faith in the dream of a quiet life change. But what they did not know was that they had stepped one foot into an international drug network where every wrong decision could end in a sentence longer than the life they had lived. And who was behind Didier? Who gave the orders? Who was really in control of that seemingly harmless journey? The answer would not be as simple as the sand they had just stepped on. There was no gunfire, no bloodshed, no broken agreements. The motive for the operation was not hatred, but a shell of pent-up desperation and greed. Mark and David were not murderers, nor were they the ringleaders, but the smoldering debt, the promise of a new life, and a nod between two men stranded in the same poverty were enough to light the fire. Didier Reyes didn't need to threaten. He just needed to put enough cash on the table for the two disoriented young men to imagine the shortest route to freedom. With the promise of landing, a simple phrase with dark implications, the plan began, hiring trucks, identifying landing sites, preparing equipment, and coordinating the exact time of arrival. There was no indication that this was a failed deal or a turf war, but underneath it all was a perfect repetition of a pattern that had been operating silently for years, using unknowns as shields, pushing them to the front lines so that the real person, the one who had engineered the whole operation, would never be revealed. In the eyes of the cartel, Mark and David were expendables, scrapped out when they succeeded, replaced when they failed. And though the price was unknown, the moment they agreed to board the boat, all escape routes disappeared. On the afternoon of May 4th, 2024, a cold wind blew in from the North Sea into Easington, carrying a salty scent and something hard to explain. A sense of unease, a simmering, as if nature were trying to warn people of something they didn't want to hear. The small rubber boat, with its medium-sized engine and reinforced cargo hold, began to appear on British Border Force radar at around 5:40 p.m. From above, National Crime Agency, NCA, surveillance planes were tracking its path from international waters, following its every move as if they knew the script. On shore, a white truck was waiting, anonymous like the thousands of others that ply Britain's highways every day. But inside, everything had been meticulously planned. The floorboards were hidden, The GPS was turned off, and the driver, David Livingstone, was behind the wheel, his face tense as if he knew something was wrong. At around 6:20 p.m., the boat pulled up quietly near the Easington caravan site. Didier, Mark, and David quickly unloaded the heavy, vacuum-sealed cargo, loading it into the truck without a word. Unbeknownst to them, just a few hundred meters away, a team of undercover investigators were watching their every move through thermal imaging. And not long after, the truck's tracking signal was intercepted by an armed task force. Inside, they found a total of 524 kilograms of high-purity cocaine, valued at 42 million pounds, one of the biggest seizures of the year. Mark was arrested as he drove towards a pre-arranged holding area. Didier was unusually calm, did not resist, and gave no further details beyond his name and Colombian nationality. Only David, shaken and confused, said exactly one sentence: "I was just driving. I don't know what was in there." But that story quickly fell apart when phone records showed frequent communication between the three, along with coded messages containing phrases like "book a boat," "clear out," and "deliver before dawn." In the eyes of investigators, this was no longer a single shipment, but a link in an organized chain of drug deliveries, where every step was choreographed like a play that allowed no room for improvisation. As soon as the truck full of cocaine was stopped on the outskirts of East Yorkshire, the entire investigative machinery of the National Crime Agency was immediately activated. None of the three men could have imagined that, over the previous weeks, every movement, every phone call, every car rental transaction, and every trip to the sea had been targeted. The investigation team left no room for escape. A sophisticated electronic surveillance system was installed, From GPS data on the truck to the location signals from the marine equipment on the rubber boat, all were stored and analyzed for specific timeframes. Dashcam footage on the A1033 was recovered, which clearly recorded the image of the truck leaving the beach, and images from the border agency's UAV provided full footage of the loading of the truck in less than 30 minutes at the NCA headquarters in Hull. Digital data analysts began examining the two C's phones from Mark Moran and David Livingston, from which a series of anonymous encrypted messages were discovered through open-source applications. Many conversations using code words, including mentions of Platinum Beach, change of wave, drop off the shipment. It is worth mentioning that not just once, but at least 3 other times Mark and David moved from Argyll to the northeast for unknown reasons, raising suspicions about the possibility of having transported drugs before. But successfully, in addition, security cameras at a gas station near Easington recorded images of Didier Reyes waiting near the beach on the morning of the incident. Although he claimed that he was just a tourist walking around, but location data from his handheld device showed that he had passed by a motel near the landing area for 2 consecutive nights in the investigation room. Although all 3 people tried to appear separate, experienced investigators quickly peeled away every contradictory detail in the testimony, from the time of renting the car, the route traveled, to the reason for stopping at a beach. The sea had no official entrance. The physical evidence was increasingly strong when Mark's fingerprints were found on the packages, and the fabric on the boat seat matched the clothes David had worn that day. Forensics also found traces of seawater in the wheel wells, confirming that the car had been driven on wet sand shortly before the arrest. Financial crime experts also got involved, tracing the flow of money from Mark's account over the past 3 months and discovering unusual transactions, including a £2,000 transfer from an anonymous account in Spain just 3 days before the shipment. All of these links, when put together, completed a criminal picture that left no room for doubt. And most importantly, it revealed that this could be just a small branch of an international drug trafficking network that was quietly exploiting the most remote coastlines of Britain as a backdoor to smuggle white goods into mainland Europe. As the chain of evidence was completed, the investigation team began to expand the scope, no longer revolving around the 3 direct characters, but turned to the hidden links behind. In particular, the name Didier Tordesillas Reyes, a Colombian citizen with no criminal record in the UK, but whose Interpol files revealed that he had indirect connections to drug trafficking groups in the Buenaventura port area, known as one of the main gateways for white goods out of South America, from which financial data was traced, showing that Didier had received small, scattered money transfers from many European countries throughout 2023, a very typical method of reverse money laundering networks, where goods are transferred one way, but the money comes back in a broken line. The deeper the investigation team dug, the more they realized that both Mark and David could be just surface layer, people chosen because they were not prominent, had no criminal records, and were easy to manipulate because of their tight financial situation. This scenario is not the first. Colombian gangs have long used European middlemen to recruit locals to act as transporters in exchange for cash received later and promises of absolute safety. But when the deal is exposed, the price always falls on the hired hands, while the real operators remain behind legal lines, anonymous, and continue to control subsequent shipments as if nothing had happened. About 2 weeks after the arrest, the first hearing took place at Hull Magistrates Court, as public and media attention began to focus on what was being billed as one of the biggest drugs busts ever to hit British shores. Mark Moran appeared distraught, his face gaunt and his eyes sunk, while David Livingstone appeared calmer, but his eyes were strained as the prosecutor listed the charges, from transporting Class A drugs to participating in a transnational criminal network. Didier Reyes remained silent throughout, confirming his name and nationality, neither denying nor protesting, as if he had become accustomed to the procedural routine. At the formal trial a month later, the evidence presented to the jury, drone footage, loading footage, phone records, witness statements, and financial statements, formed an impenetrable wall of conviction. Mark initially remained silent, but after 3 days of arguments and overwhelming evidence, he admitted part of his role, claiming he had no knowledge of the total value of the shipment, which was worth £42 million, and that he had thought it was a small illegal item. David chose to plead guilty from the start, hoping for a reduced sentence for his early cooperation. As a result, Mark Moran was sentenced to 15 years in prison with no parole for the first 2/3, while David Livingston received 7 years and 9 months for his confession. Didier Reyes remains in custody awaiting extradition on charges of involvement in an armed drug cartel in Colombia. Judge Mark Berry concluded that this case is a slice of a much larger, more sophisticated and more dangerous system than this trial has ever attempted to cover. The verdict does not close the story, as investigators continue to trace the money, international contacts, and the possibility of a repeat of the boating pattern along the British coast. As the prison doors closed behind Mark Moran and David Livingston, it seemed like justice had been served. But bigger questions remained. Who gave the orders? Who will replace them on the next shipment? The families of the two young men who thought their sons were honest laborers now suffer a silent shame and loss. Didier Reyes, the stone-faced Colombian, remains silent, leaving a gap in the legal record that has yet to be closed. And while the net of the law may have tightened this time, the deserted beaches, rubber boats, and multi-million-dollar packages continue to drift somewhere, waiting for a chance to return. Is this the end, or just the first chapter in an undercurrent that is rolling across the ocean? What do you think? Leave a comment below, share your views, and if you want to continue following true crime stories, told with the utmost detail and accuracy, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next crime-solving journeys.